1954. A bedroom in Indianapolis, 6:15 in the morning. A woman in her slip reaches for the girdle on the back of the door. She dusts talcum powder across her hips and begins pulling it up. The rubber grips the skin. The boning presses flat against her stomach. She has not yet had coffee. She has already started hurting. These are 12 things every woman in the 1950s wore and never had the option to refuse. Most have been completely forgotten. Number 12, the girdle. Every woman over the age of 14 was expected to wear a girdle under her clothes. It was not a fashion preference, it was a social requirement enforced by mothers, by saleswomen, and by every magazine on the newsstand. The Playtex Living Girdle, approximately $3.95 at the Sears catalog counter. Heavy panels of latex rubber and elastic stitched together in a tube that ran from the waist to mid-thigh. The smell of talcum powder dusted across the hips and stomach just to slide the thing on. The slow roll of rubber gripping the skin as she pulled it up inch by inch. In summer, the sweat pooled underneath and had nowhere to go. At night, she peeled it off and the red welts were still there an hour later. Girls as young as 13 were taken to the foundation counter at JCPenney by their own mothers, fitted by a stranger, sent home in a garment they had not asked for and could not refuse. She wore it every single day of her adult life. She never once said it was comfortable. She said it was what you did. The girdle held everything in place on the outside, but it was the undergarment directly above it that shaped the silhouette the whole country demanded. Number 11, the longline bullet bra. The bullet bra extended from the bust to the bottom of the rib cage in a stiff, heavily structured cone shape. It did not follow the natural curve of the body, it replaced it. The maiden-form chansonette, one of the most recognized bras in America. Circular stitched cone cups that created a rigid pointed silhouette under every blouse and sweater. Boning along the sides and between the cups. Wire stays that dug into the ribs when she bent forward or sat too long. The sharp point of each cup poking through a thin cotton blouse. Approximately $2.50. The straps on many models were not adjustable. They cut into the shoulders by noon and left grooves in the skin that lasted until morning. It did not shape her body to look natural. It shaped her body to look like what the garment industry decided a woman should look like. She wore it because the alternative was judgment. The bra gave her the silhouette. But what held that silhouette in motion was the scratching, rustling layer hidden underneath the skirt. Number 10, the crinoline petticoat. Stiff nylon net petticoats worn under every full skirt and dress, often 2 or 3 layered at once. They held the signature silhouette of the era, and they punished the woman wearing them all day long. Starched nylon net that felt like window screen against bare legs. The constant rustle and crinkle with every step. Some women dipped their crinolines in sugar water or liquid starch to make them even stiffer. Static electricity that made the skirt cling to her stockings by 2 in the afternoon. The raw red rash on the inside of her thighs after a full day of church and Sunday dinner. One crinoline cost roughly $1.50. Most women owned 4 or 5. Some teenagers layered 3 at a time for a school dance, each one scraping against the one beneath it. The dress looked beautiful. Nobody asked what was happening underneath it. And beneath the crinoline, running the full length of her legs, was another layer she could never forget about. Not for a single minute. Number 9, seamed nylon stockings and garter clips. Before pantyhose arrived in the early 1960s, every pair of stockings was held up by metal clips attached to a garter belt or to the tabs at the bottom of the girdle itself. Each stocking had a seam running straight up the back of the leg. That seam had to be perfectly straight at all times. A pair of Hanes or Berkshire nylons cost about $1.15. The metal garter clip bit into the skin at the top of the thigh where the flesh was softest. The constant checking over one shoulder and every store window to see if the seam had drifted. The clip releasing without warning, and the stocking sliding down in public. runs that started at the toe and climbed past the ankle before she reached the grocery store. When stockings were too expensive or simply unavailable, women painted their bare legs with leg satin liquid stocking and drew a seam line up the back of each calf with an eyebrow pencil. A crooked seam could ruin a reputation. That was the world she got dressed for every morning. She walked on those aching legs in stockings held up by clips, and she did it in shoes that were designed by someone who had clearly never stood in them for longer than a minute. Number 8. The pointed toe stiletto pump. The stiletto heel arrived in the early 1950s and became the required shoe for any woman who wanted to appear put together in public. 2.5 to 3-inch heels. Narrow, pointed toes that compress the front of the foot into a triangle. I. Miller or Palizio. For the department store customer, naturalizer at the lower end, $5 to $8 a pair. The toe box crushed the small toes together until they overlapped. Bunions started forming before a woman turned 30. The particular ache in the ball of the foot after standing at the stove all afternoon in heels because company was coming for dinner. Walking across a gravel parking lot at the church. Crossing a rain-slick sidewalk downtown with the heel catching in every crack. No sneakers in the closet. No flats for running errands. Heels to the grocery store. Heels to the post office. Heels to pick the children up from school. She rarely wore flat shoes in formal public settings. While saddle shoes, loafers, and ballet flats were wildly popular for teenagers and casual housework, dressed-up public spaces demanded heels. But it was not just the feet and the legs and the torso that had to be correct. Even her hands had to be covered, and not for warmth. Number 7. Mandatory white gloves. White cotton or nylon gloves were required for church, for shopping downtown, for luncheons, and for any occasion a woman considered public. Going without them was a visible social error. Founds or Hansen gloves at roughly $1 a pair. Thin white cotton that showed every smudge within the hour. The difficulty of opening a handbag clasp with gloved fingers. Fumbling for change at the register in Woolworths while the line grew behind her, the sweat trapped inside nylon gloves on an August afternoon in Memphis or St. Louis, pulling them off finger by finger, folding them into the purse exactly so, washing them by hand every single evening and stretching them flat on a towel to dry overnight, replacing them the moment a stain would not come out. A woman's hands could be perfectly clean. The gloves were not about cleanliness. They were proof that she had been raised correctly. Number 6. The Merry Widow. A strapless, all-in-one foundation garment that combined a bra, a waist cincher, and garter attachments into a single boned piece. It was required under strapless evening dresses and most formals. It was the most constrictive garment a woman could buy short of a medical brace. The Warner's Merry Widow, approximately $5 to $7, 15 to 20 vertical boning channels running from the bust to the hip, the top edge cutting into the soft flesh under the arms, the rigid busk closure at the front pressing into the stomach after a single course at dinner, the complete inability to bend at the waist. A woman at a formal banquet who could not pick up her dropped napkin without turning her entire body sideways. Breathing that stayed shallow all evening because a deep breath meant the top hook might give way. She looked like she was floating across the room. She felt like she was locked inside a cage. And that cage cost more than anything else in her closet. The Merry Widow was the formal version. But the everyday version of that same misery had its own name, and in summer, it was far worse. Number 5, the full slip. A full-length slip was mandatory under every dress and most skirts. Going without one was considered the same as going without underclothes entirely. Barbizon or Vanity Fair, nylon or rayon satin, $1.50 to $3, an additional full layer of fabric against the skin in every season. The slip riding up and bunching at the waist inside a fitted dress. The static cling that made the outer skirt stick to the slip and wrap around her knees, reaching underneath the skirt in the ladies' room to tug the whole thing back into position. The clammy feel of nylon flat against the skin in a house without air conditioning. In a car without air conditioning. Standing over a hot stove in July with a girdle, a slip, and a cotton dress layered on top of each other. It was invisible. It was mandatory. And every woman alive in that era remembers the feeling of a slip bunching at the hip and the quiet frustration of having no way to fix it where anyone could see. Number 4. The rubber panty girdle in summer. A lighter alternative to the full girdle, the rubber panty girdle was sold as the warm weather solution. It was supposed to be cooler. It was not cooler. It was a different kind of misery. The Playtex Panty Brief Girdle. Approximately $2. A solid panel of latex rubber from the waist to the upper thigh with no ventilation and no breathability. The heat rash that started by noon on any July afternoon. Talcum powder applied generously at 7 in the morning and completely absorbed into the rubber by 10. The particular smell of latex and perspiration that no amount of evening in Paris perfume could cover. Rolling it down in a department store bathroom required both hands and a full effort that left her flushed and breathing hard. Rolling it back up was worse. She wore it in 90-degree heat. She wore it to the county fair. And while heavily pregnant women were expected to maintain a proper figure, a woman 8 months along would typically wear a specialized maternity girdle rather than a standard pull-on rubber panty girdle. Still, nobody ever designed these garments with true comfort in mind. And still, the obligations did not end at the waist or the legs or the hands. Even the top of her head carried a requirement, one that came with a sharp steel reminder. Number 3. The hat and the hat pin. Hats were required at church and at most public occasions through the 1950s. Many styles were secured with a single long hat pin pushed through the hat and directly through a rolled section of hair. A pillbox hat or a wide-brimmed felt from the millinery department at Gimbel's or Strawbridge and Clothier, $2 to $5. The hat pin itself, 4 to 6 inches of sharpened steel with a decorative head, pushed through the crown of the hat, through a twist of hair, and out the other side. The occasional prick of the scalp that she ignored. The weight of a heavy winter hat slowly pulling the pin loose by the middle of the sermon. Sitting in a church pew behind a woman whose hat brim blocked every line of sight. Removing the pin carefully at home, sometimes pulling a few strands of hair still twisted around the shaft. She did not wear it because she wanted to. She wore it because a woman who walked into church without a hat had failed before she reached her pew. Number 2, the waist cincher. A wide, heavily boned elastic belt worn around the natural waist to create the exaggerated hourglass the era demanded. It was a separate garment from the girdle, worn in addition to the girdle. Another layer, another clasp, another restriction. Approximately $2 to $4, 6 to 8 inches wide. Boning at the front, the sides, and the back. Hook and eye closures that required a full exhale to fasten the last row. The top edge digging into the bottom of the rib cage when she sat down at the dinner table. The faint popping sound when a hook gave way under pressure. A visible ridge of flesh pushed up above the cincher and pressed down below it. The mark still on her skin an hour after she finally took it off at night. The waist the magazines showed was not a natural waist. It was a manufactured one. And the tool that manufactured it left marks that only she ever saw. Number 1, the sanitary belt. Before adhesive pads existed, women wore a narrow elastic belt around the waist with small metal clips at the front and back. A thick cotton pad hooked onto those clips and hung between the legs. Every woman wore one, every single month. And nobody spoke about it. The Kotex sanitary belt, approximately 50 cents at the drugstore counter. A thin strip of pink or white elastic with 2 small metal hooks. The pad was a thick rectangle of absorbent cotton, bulky enough to feel with every step. The clip pressing into the lower abdomen, the belt riding up at the waist, the pad sliding slowly out of alignment with every movement. Walking carefully, sitting down carefully, standing up carefully. The constant awareness that something might shift, might show, might fail. The particular terror of a white skirt on a warm day in May. No adhesive, no wings, no stretch material, just a belt and 2 clips and the silent prayer that everything held together until she could reach a bathroom. She never once mentioned it in public. She never complained. Her daughter found out about it the same way she had, standing in the bathroom at 12 years old while her mother handed her the belt and the pay and one quiet sentence of explanation. That was the entire conversation. Every woman in America wore one, every single month, and the whole world acted as though it did not exist. And if you want more forgotten wisdom from the generations who came before us, the next video is waiting for you right now.